Hello, Russ Brown here, publisher of Rusted Iron Games. I am here today to talk to you about our new release for Pathfinder role-playing game, first edition, called Template Races Tieflings. And this is our newest release. And as I said, I'm the publisher, but I also happen to be the author of this particular release. So I'm going to just talk to you about that. It's a PDF release available via Drive-Thru RPG and also our Rusted Iron Games website store. As you can see, I said I've got it open here in a PDF reader, and over on the right-hand side or left-hand side here, you can see that it's fully bookmarked, so you can jump to any point within the document that you want. It is 12 pages, including the cover. So 11 pages of content and the cover. And let me go ahead and go into full screen mode so you can see this a little bit closer. Okay, so here we are on full screen mode. This is our new cover design. I just want to mention real quick, we've moved the Pathfinder compatible logo for first edition ones from the top of the page down to the bottom, and we've added the words first edition so that this shares more design elements with our second edition releases, which have the logo at the bottom and say second edition underneath them. And the reason that we did that is just so that you as a consumer could tell easily whether this is a first edition or second edition product. This also has a great piece of stock art. This is a Tiefling Robe by Brian Brindley. This piece of stock art is available through Drive-Thru RPG. So that's basically the cover. Let me go into the first page. So we've got an introduction, and we start talking about the template race. So let me just tell you what a template race is to start with. In Pathfinder, in D&D 3.5, there was a concept of a monster stat, a monster template. And you could have like a half-dragon template that you could add to any monster stat block in the entire game. And the idea is that, so you have this half-dragon template, you can add it to any monster. That monster becomes a half-dragon version. So you can add a half-dragon template to a lion and come up with a half-dragon lion. So we took that same idea and made template races. The idea is to provide a set of guidelines on how to make changes to a playable PC race. That's a 0 hit dice race that has all of their hit dice determined by what character class you choose when you level up. That's basically all the core rulebook races and any other playable PC race in the game. So you could pick any playable PC race and pick one of the Tiefling heritages, combine those together. So that way you don't have a Tiefling that's just restricted to be human only, or their elf or gnome or halfling heritage is only like flavor, and that doesn't actually affect the game mechanics at all, right? The idea of this is that you could make an elf Tiefling that has some of the racial abilities of elves, or a gnome one that has some of the racial abilities of gnomes. So let me skip forward just a little bit. Let's talk about the existing Tiefling heritages that are published by Paizo. So I'm going to skip down here to page 4. And I have, like I said, the Tiefling heritages are published by Paizo. I have reprinted them here without any of the flavor text, right? This is just mechanically reprinted here just for reference, right? So that when you're putting this together, you have it in a handy spot. The original version of the Tiefling was based on a generic fiend, and we've called that Evil Spawn. So if you have an Evil Spawn dwarf, which we have stats for, that's like the regular Tiefling combined with a dwarf. Now Paizo has published 10 additional Tiefling heritages that are all based on specific fiend types. Like a Beast Brood is a Tiefling with Rakshasa heritage. Fault Spawn is a Tiefling with Asura heritage. And then there's one for Demodan, Daemon, Devil, Oni, Quipoth, Demon, Chitin, and Div. So we have 11 total. And mechanically, the difference is, you could see what it says, skilled. Every Tiefling gets a +2 racial bonus on 2 skills. Those skills change based on the heritage you pick. Also, every Tiefling has a innate spell-like ability. That spell-like ability also changes based on the heritage you pick. Like the original one is Darkness. But if you pick a Shackleborn, which is the Chitin one, you get Web instead of Darkness. So that's just a little bit of a foundation. So the idea is you would then pick a race and pick one of these heritages and combine those. Like you would say, I want to play a foul spawn kobold, or I want to play a hell spawn Gorin, or whatever race you want. That's the idea. Okay, so let me just go through the main parts of this document. First of all, we have the actual rules for the template itself on the first 3 pages. We have heritages on page 4, and then starting about halfway, a little bit more than halfway down, we start getting into examples. We provide a dozen examples, actually more than a dozen, of how to actually apply this template. So there's 14, I believe, because we have the 11 heritages, but we did 2 each of evil spawn and 2 hell spawn, and which is the devil one, and then 2 pitborn, which is the demon one, because I thought the generic and the devil and the demon would be the most commonly used, so I did those twice. So we have 14, and that's the rest of the document. That's the rest of the document, the 12 pages. So let me go ahead and just jump back up and talk to you about the template a little bit. So we just have an introduction about the template that kind of talks about the concept and how to pick your moral race and your tiefling race that I just talked about. Then let's jump into ability scores. So the way that I thought would be interesting to do ability scores is basically to take the ability scores from your base race, cut them in half, and then also do the same thing for the tiefling heritage, and cut those in half, and then basically stack those together. So that's interesting. So table 1 right here is base race ability. We provided about a dozen or so, maybe 15 base races that you can use, and I just as example cut the ability modifiers in half. Pathfinder normally uses either a +2 or a -2, so those become +1 or -1. You can see a few races like Goblin has a +4 to Dex, that becomes a +2. Kobold has a -4 to Strength. Orc has a +4 to Strength, those become -2 and +2. Relatively, basically you cut them in half, and then you stack them up together. So like one of our combinations I thought would be really cool would be a Beast Brood Catfolk, because Beast Brood is the Rakshasa heritage, right? And I thought that would pair really well with Catfolk. Well, by coincidence, or design actually, I guess, but not my design, they end up having the exact Beast Brood Tieflings and Catfolk have the same ability modifiers. They both originally have a +2 to Dex, a -2 to Wisdom, and a +2 to Charisma, because apparently that represents what cats are like, right? So when you do this, you actually end up with the same of where you started on both sides. You end up with +2 Dex, -2 Wisdom, +2 Charisma. That's not always the case. It's just that first one that I did actually turned out like that, and it was kind of funny. So you can pick, as you're designing this as a GM or a player, you can pick ones that hit the same abilities like the Beast Brood Catfolk, or you can pick ones that hit different abilities. And this document really is intended for both players and GMs. GMs, if you're doing world building, this is just a great way to be kind of consistent on making various different tieflings. If you're a player and you want to make a character using these rules, obviously you're probably going to need to get your GM's approval to do anything outside the norm, and don't just try and spring it on them. There is one thing, so Pathfinder always uses multiples of 2, +2, +4, +6 in some cases. There is a designer's note in here. This method can very, very easily end up with +1s, -1s, +3s on any given ability. So there is a possibility if someone was trying to min-max and they were using a point buy, that they could pick a combination with a lot of +1s or +3 or something like that, and then buy ability scores with odd numbers, and then somehow, do the math to get it to have an inordinate number of abilities that kick over into the next tier for your modifier. if that's something you're worried about, we just recommend using a different method to generate your ability scores, like using an array or rolling dice, of course. If that's a concern for you, I've called that out to be aware of it. If it's not a concern, go to town, do whatever you want. And then so the rest, we go through the other thing, guidelines on how to create the rest of the racial traits. So type and subtype. Normally, the Paizo published Tiefling just has a native outsider type. In subtype, we're adding in the type of the base race as an augmented subtype, and also whatever subtypes the base race has. So for an elf, for example, instead of just being an outsider with the native subtype, they would be an outsider with the native, augmented human, and elf subtypes. And there's a note here to call out that when you have augmented human as a subtype, that means they are humanoid, right? Augmented humanoid is a subtype. They are humanoid, right? So that means those Tieflings using this method will be subject to charm person and enlarge person and hold person spells. Anything that targets humanoids will be able to, for good or for negative, will actually affect them using this method. So that's just called out. Size, you basically set your size based on the size of the base race. If you're medium or large, you're a medium tiefling. If you're small or smaller, you're a small tiefling. If you're huge or larger, you're a large tiefling. Speed, you basically get from the base race, plus any additional modifiers that affect your speed. Say like goblins and kobolds who are small but have 30-foot speed. The tiefling versions get 30-foot speed. Dwarves who are medium but have 20-foot speed and have slow and steady, where they're not slowed down by encumbrance or armor. They get that as well. Basically, all tieflings get dark vision. If the base race has low light vision, they also get low light vision. Skilled, this is where, when we looked at the heritages, where it has the 2 skills listed there, this is where the tieflings get the +2 racial bonus on those 2 skills. But there's also an option in here, if the base race has racial traits that give racial bonuses to skills or to perception, in the case of the keen senses trait, then the tiefling, when a player goes to create an individual type of that type of tiefling, they can choose whether they want to get the tiefling bonus or the base race bonus. And the same thing for spell-like abilities. Tieflings get the spell-like ability determined by their heritage, but if the base race also has spell-like abilities, they can choose between those instead, as well. So that is let me pop down real quick to the gnome. That's a good example. I went too far. Let me go back up. Fault spawn gnome traits. So if we look at the spell-like abilities for gnomes, they get hideous laughter from fault spawn, or when you're creating an individual fault spawn gnome, you could choose to keep the gnome magic trait instead of getting hideous laughter. And you have to choose that when you create the character. Same thing for skilled. Fault spawn gnomes gain +2 racial bonus to appraise and knowledge local checks from Azura ancestry. Alternatively, they can take either the keen senses trait, which gives them a bonus to perception, or obsessive, which is a gnome trait that I forget exactly what what skills it gives, but it gives racial bonuses to skills for gnomes. So they can pick one of those 3 options. So you could have 2 fault spawn gnomes, one that has keen senses and hideous laughter, and maybe the other one has the tiefling bonuses to appraise and knowledge local, but then has no magic. So you can customize them individually right there. Let me go back up. Let me also mention right here that this is another neat piece of stock art. This one is by Jacob Blackman, and it's also available through DriveThruRPG for this Tiefling Warrior. Let's see, what else we have here? Fiendish Resistance. You get the standard Tiefling energy resistances of 5 to cold, electricity, and fire. Fiendish Sorcery. So this is an interesting one. Fiendish, the way this was originally published by Paizo, Tiefling sorcerers with the abyssal or infernal bloodlines got +2 to their charisma when they're calculating any of their sorcerer class abilities. Since Paizo published the original version of Tiefling, they published additional Fiendish bloodlines. And so I was able to find Daemon, Div, and Rakshasa bloodlines that Paizo has published. So I added them in here as well. And those are the official ones. If you have a version of another Fiendish bloodline from a different third-party company, like if you have a Demodan bloodline or a Chitin bloodline, I recommend adding them in here as well. But then what I did recommend is if you then have a Tiefling that is a specific type, that you restrict it to just that one bloodline. So let me show you the example on the Beast Brood Catfolk. Since the Beast Brood is the Rakshasa bloodline, right? A Beast Brood Catfolk, when their Fiendish Sorcery comes up, I restricted the bonus on Fiendish Sorcery for Beast Brood to only be the Rakshasa bloodline. There's a note here that calls that out. You don't have to do that if you want, but I recommend it. It pulls the power curve back down a little bit, because I think this version of the Tiefling is a little bit ahead on the power curve of the regular published Tiefling. Let me jump back up here. So the next section is that you get a trait from the base race. And I've kind of listed general categories of racial traits. Something that gives you a bonus feat, something that gives you a bonus to saving throws, natural armor, natural weaponry, weapon familiarity, defensive training, hatred, or skills, racial skills. So the idea is basically you go through this list, and the first racial trait that you find in this order that the base race has, you apply that, and then you stop. So they only get one of these, right? And this basically just ensures that whatever you pick, the Tiefling is going to end up with at least one racial trait from the base race. And the very last one, racial skills, is kind of the catch-all. So if you have underneath the skilled part, we said that you can make it as a choice. But if that's the only thing they have, just add it as a racial skill and don't make it a choice. Let me show you an example of that. That's a good example of that is Goblin. So we have an evil spawn Goblin. And when we got to the part where we were going to pick a racial trait from Goblin, the only thing that they had to pick was this +4 racial bonus on ride and stealth checks. So instead of making that an option underneath the skilled, evil spawn Goblins basically get both the skilled bonus from Tiefling and the skilled bonus from Goblins. And since they both happen to include stealth, I just made a note that they should stack. If you think that's too powerful and they shouldn't stack, that's fine. These are very much guidelines to go ahead and pick what you want. The last couple of things is languages. Basically, when you're learning languages, you can pick from the list that's provided by Tiefling or the base race. We've combined the list there. Just to note that any other additional racial traits from the base race is lost if they're not added already. And then when you take alternate racial traits, you can take anything from the Tiefling list or the base race list. But of course, following the basic rules for alternate racial traits, you have to have the skill that you want to trade out. Or not the skill, the racial trait. For example, if you had a dwarf Tiefling and you wanted to take a dwarf alternate racial trait that traded out Stone Cunning, well, you better have Stone Cunning on that dwarf Tiefling in order to trade that out. That's basically it for the template. Once again, here's the heritages. Then we start the section for the actual examples. We have Beast Brood Catfolk, which is Rakshasa. Let me call out here that this is another piece of stock art. Also, this is the second one from Brian Brindley. This is the half Rakshasa rogue, so I thought that fit well for the Beast Brood Catfolk. That was cool. Let's see, we have Evil Spawn Dwarf racial traits. We have Evil Spawn Goblins, Fault Spawn Gnomes, Foul Spawn Ratfolk. Grimspawn Halflings, Hellspawn Orcs, Hellspawn Tengu, Hunger Seed Wayang, which I think is a neat combination. Wayangs are kind of rare, and Hunger Seed are Oni. They fit. They're both real creepy. They kind of fit together well. Here we have that same stock art from the cover again, by Brian Brimley. We have Motherless Half-Orcs, which is the Quiboth heritage. Pitborn Drow, and Pitborn Gripply, which is Pitborn is the demon racial trait, or racial heritage, I should say. Shackleborn Kobolds, which is the Chitin one. And then Spitespawn Elves. We also have this nice little silhouette stock art. This is from Deposit Photos. And that's basically it. Here's our last page that has just the wrap-up, and that has the open game license. You can check out the sources that I used to create this. So, I hope that gives you a great overview of Template Race's Tieflings. Thank you. Have a great day. And once again, I will just put the links down below to where you can get this product if you're interested. Thanks.